Welcome to the SRS Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron J. Babyar, and I'm the Training Director of Support Raising Solutions. Whether you're a new ministry worker or a veteran looking to increase your competence and confidence, Support Raising Solutions seeks to bless you in your quest to be a spiritually healthy, vision-driven, fully funded Great Commission worker. My guest today is Jason Ruch, and Jason's been on a couple of other podcasts, and this one's going to be different, intentionally so. So before I kind of explain all that, Jason, welcome, my friend. I'm glad you're back today.
Great to be back, Aaron.
So, Jason, you and I have discussed having a different sort of podcast, and really it came from an idea of let's look at this a little bit differently, meaning this. We know that a lot of our listeners are missionaries or becoming some sort of Great Commission worker where they need to raise support. And that's mostly the type of people that I get to interact with. Now, that's true of you as well, isn't it?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. But also, one of the common questions that I know we both hear different versions of, it really kind of revolves around the idea of how do I talk to local churches? How do I connect with local churches? I mean, I get that one all the time. I'm assuming you do as well. And maybe you can even give me an example.
Oh, yeah. This is one of the most important things for us as missionaries. I've mentioned this on a previous podcast, but one of my favorite verses as a support raising missionary is 1 Corinthians 9:14, where the Lord says, not the Lord, but Paul says that the Lord commanded. That's a strong word, right? The Lord commanded that people who proclaim the gospel get their living by the gospel. And so, as you know, those of us that work in full-time ministry, for parachurch organizations, for missionaries being sent from churches, one of the most common things that we need to do is we need to invite individuals, but also churches to pray for our ministry and to give toward our ministry. So yeah, it's a very common thing. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Support Raising Solutions will commonly, if not always, we encourage Great Commission workers to engage with local churches. And yet that's not an easy thing. The reality is churches will have different expectations. They will give at different levels. They will sometimes have really healthy member care ideas and thoughts. And sometimes they will have some protocols that are really time consuming and really high expectations. And sometimes they're on repeat. For instance, there's a church that I used to partner with that every year wanted me to reapply and take a lot of time, like paperwork. And even though I hadn't changed a whole lot, and for those that are listening to this, we actually have the idea, Jason and I did, of recording this from the standpoint of we want you to listen to this as a Great Commission worker, but also we want you to feel confident that you can actually even share this episode with somebody that works at a local church, or maybe they are the mission board chair or on the mission board, or maybe they're the pastor and they oversee the whole missions budget. And so we love missionaries. We love local churches. We know that they want to partner together, but that's not always an easy thing. Jason, I don't know, did I summarize it very well? Maybe you can say it a little clearer or better, or even bring a finer point to it.
Yeah, I think that's good, Aaron. And I would the only thing I would add, and I think you're here as well, is the principles that we're going to talk about, the things that we're talking about, 5 things to consider when a missionary asks you for money, is for churches and pastors, but it's also for individuals because
that's a good point.
Yeah, so everybody who is part of local churches and everyone who reads the scriptures sees that we are called to be a cheerful, giving people, and so it's helpful for us to think. You and I, Aaron, because, as you said, we work primarily with missionaries, and so you've got the God Asks. Steve Shadrack's written that. That's for missionaries. You've got funding your ministry. by
Scott Morton.
Scott Morton, right?
Yeah.
So there's these books, and then there's websites, and there's trainings that we do. You guys do boot camp, and then we do an MPD training in-house with crew. But we, you've mentioned this before, but when I say MPD, I mention ministry. That's ministry partner development. That's our term for support raising.
Right.
So we're doing these, but the other side of that is, well, we're talking to individuals and we're talking to churches, and so the thought was, wouldn't it also be helpful for churches and individuals to hear a little bit of our world as missionaries?
Yeah.
Certainly, we don't think we're always doing it right. We know that we say things that come out wrong at times. We know that
Yes.
we've so what we want the church to hear, and what we want individuals who are being invited to partner with missionaries to hear is, hey, we are committed to continuing to grow and train our staff and our missionaries, but we also think it could be helpful for you to consider a few things as we do get in touch with you. We text you, or we
Yes.
message you, or we have appointments with you, and invite you into the mission.
Well put. So a little bit about, I guess I don't want to go into full resumes, but because this is an episode that could potentially be shared with a lot of different ministry leaders that don't typically listen to this podcast, or even individuals, or just churches in general. So just a little bit about us really quick. I'll introduce myself a bit, and then you can do the same, Jason. I have university and seminary degrees, and I spent really the first half of my vocational ministry focus in local churches. So I really do love the local church and its ministry leaders. But the other half of my career so far, I've worked in a missions-focused expression of the church. So God has given me a passion specifically to serve Great Commission-focused leaders. And I helped start and lead a ministry called Exago, whose primary mission is to equip ministry leaders to survive and thrive. So often that is actually through like one-to-one focused holistic coaching, but I'm not really here to talk about Exago Ministries, but I do want to explain why we partner so greatly with Support Raising Solutions. So Steve Shadrach pointed out to me years ago that funding is one of the most felt needs of missional ministry leaders, whether they admit it or not. So I love to train and equip leaders in the area of developing their prayer and financial support teams, because I want them to thrive, whether it's in bringing the gospel through Bible translation, or bringing the gospel through fighting human trafficking, or building orphanages, whatever. That's why I continue to be the training director of Support Raising Solutions. Now, in serving with SRS takes a fair chunk of my time, and I facilitate around 12 to 14 support raising boot camp conferences every year. And on average, those have about 70 people in attendance from all sorts of Great Commission-focused ministries from all over the world. So, of course, I do a lot of those in the U.S., and I do some in the other part of the world as well. So it's fair to say that I have an opportunity to talk about the whole process of what to consider when someone is asking for partnership. And I get to talk about that with a lot of ministry leaders face to face. And then, of course, those that listen to this weekly podcast as well. And Jason, a lot of those leaders, well, they're often wondering about how to approach churches for both prayer and financial support, because as it turns out, that's a lot harder than they expected. In fact, as an aside, there's actually a book out there by Sam Metcalf. It's called Beyond the Local Church. And that book, actually, I really do like that book, but it ruffles some feathers because it talks about that intersection between the local church and missional church. And whether people love or hate the book, I really recommend it because it really challenges leaders who are making decisions to think about their finances, to think about their partnerships on behalf of the local church, and it challenges their thinking. So it's an area that the church as a whole could really grow in, and so I really appreciate the discourse that book summons. But anyway, that's kind of a little bit of a side tangent, Jason. I still have a lot to learn, and I'm sure you feel the same way. So tell us a little bit about yourself and a bit about your resume in this discussion as well, please.
Yeah. So I've been on staff with Crew for 19 years, and the past 12 have been in this realm of ministry partner development, support raising, so training and coaching and leading our staff, those who doing trainings with those who join us, but also ongoing training for those missionaries that stay with us for a long time, and that's our hope for most of them. And so, like you, Aaron, I think we part of what we're saying here is we we know some things. We've experienced some things, both in our personal support raising,
Mm-hmm.
but also we've as we've trained and coached others, we hear stories all the time, don't we?
Yes.
About not only how people that are missionaries are raising their support, but how are they experiencing people in the church as they invite them to partner with them.
Yes.
So I think we want to speak to that. But here's the other thing, right, Aaron? Is we uh, even as support raising missionaries, we are called to be givers, right? So
Absolutely.
just as you said, we're on a continuing to grow. This is part of our sanctification as well.
Yes.
Is boy, we're preaching to ourselves here when we talk about how to receive the missionary, because I don't know about you, but I get letters in the mail and I get texts about supporting people too.
All the time, all the time. In fact, my wife
Yeah.
and I, we love, and I'm not going to get into how many and how much and all that stuff. That's not the point of this, but
Mm-hmm.
we have been blessed to, add a few people to our normal giving this year. We're so excited to do that. Like, if you can see my face, like I'm so excited. Like we love to do that, but
Yeah.
also we had to say no to some people this year, and we didn't want to cut
Yeah.
anybody off that we were already supporting, and so yeah, we're always living in that tension. But meanwhile, and you mentioned this, but I'll say it a little more clearly. I am a
Mm-hmm.
fully funded Great Commission worker, meaning I completely, by God's grace, have raised up a team of people and a few churches
Mm-hmm.
to regularly give and regularly pray so that I can focus completely 100% full time on the Great Commission work that God has put in front of me. I'm thankful for it. I love it. It was also one of the hardest things I ever did in learning how to develop a team. And that's one of the reasons that I get to speak into this topic, is because I have a track record of failure for sure,
Mm-hmm.
but also overcoming that and learning to do this in what I believe is a God honoring way, and it's helping others be mobilized, not just from the U.S. but in other countries, be mobilized to be spiritually healthy, vision driven, and fully funded. And so my passion is equipping ministry leaders to survive and thrive, and one of the most felt needs is money. It's
Mm-hmm.
finances. A lot of
Yeah.
ministry leaders don't even want to admit it, but it's true. They're feeling it. And so when Jason, when you suggested that we have a conversation about 5 things to consider when a missionary asks you for money, that was your
Mm-hmm.
suggested title. I
Yeah.
jumped on it and was like, hey, let's do that, but
Yeah.
let's not just do this from the standpoint of for people raising support. Let's actually put this together in a podcast episode that somebody could potentially share with someone who might be considering joining their team. And also, you mentioned that you're working on an article. Tell us a little bit about that. It's not even published yet, but before we dig into this, I know this is a long
Mm-hmm.
preamble, but I think this is all good stuff.
That's okay.
Tell us, Jason, what's going on with that?
Yeah. So the work that you and I have done, I mean, we think about these things all the time, and so over the years, I've thought, well, how are ways? So this podcast would be one of them, but how are ways that we can help those of us that have worked with missionaries and in training them and how to raise their support? How can we help the church to receive us well?
Mm-hmm.
Again, we're going to continue to do what we need to do on our side, but how can we help those who we're reaching out to? And so,
Great.
yeah, I've got an article in the works right now. The working title is 5 Things to Consider When a Missionary Asks You for Money.
Okay.
And so I'm working with someone at the Gospel Coalition. We're hopeful that that'll be posted sometime soon, but not sure.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Let's take a few seconds to mention an important resource that can be helpful for support raisers. CMM Press has published another great book that is not only for those who raise their personal support, but also they oversee teams or even an organization whose staff teams raises their own personal support. Scott Morton is a champion for biblically based ministry partnership development, so I highly recommend that you pick up a copy of his book called Blind Spots. It's available at cmmpress.org, where you can receive a 10% discount if you use the code SRS Podcast.
Well, my friend, let's start digging into those 5
Mm-hmm.
things. I know them because you were kind enough to share with me the bullet points, but I'm not gonna tell everybody. They gotta listen to this whole
Yeah.
thing. So let's jump into it, or they gotta find the article later on. So what's the
Right.
first one? What's the first thing to consider when a missionary asks you for money?
Yeah, I think the first thing is recognize the intent of the missionary. The simplest way to put it is the intent of the missionary is not simply to get money. What we're after is to see lives changed by Jesus. That is the intent of the missionary. And so I think it can be really helpful for us when people reach out to us for support or when we're doing it for those people that we're connecting with, to not lump us in with other people or other organizations that are looking for money. We are not trying to raise money for the fire department, or we're not trying to raise money for, we're not calling, like, sometimes you get these calls on your phone and somebody's trying to raise money for this, that, or the other thing. Not that they're bad things. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, the missionary is after life change, gospel life change by Jesus Christ. And so couldn't that be a helpful posture for us to have when we get a letter in the mail or a text on our phone to go, this is somebody who believes God is leading them to be his ambassador full-time vocationally. I should consider that.
Yeah.
Let me think about that. So that's the first thing.
And I want to also just tack on that really quickly. They're not selling you anything.
No.
It's a partnership in the gospel. And so their intent is partnership. So whatever your Great Commission dreams are, it might just align with what this missionary is planning to do. And so they're inviting you to consider that. Please don't see that as a widget being sold or a promise of coffee beans every other month from a foreign country. That is not the intent of the missionary. The intent is Great Commission work.
It's a great point. Yeah, we've got nothing to sell. Your return on investment will not be, something that you can taste, see, or touch. Right? It's going to be, it's going to be life change. It's going to be supernatural.
Okay, that was a great first thing to consider. All right, let's go on to the second one. What's the second thing to consider?
So now you've got the text from a missionary that wants to meet you. What do we do? The second is respond lovingly. And so this is, if I'm honest, this is one of the greatest frustrations of missionaries. And I want to say frustration. I don't want to say bitterness. We don't believe we're called to be bitter at anybody. We are a grateful people.
Yes.
Jesus has changed our lives, and we want to be used by him to change others.
Yeah.
But one of the things that can be so challenging for us as missionaries is when we either dial the phone, and I understand people don't pick up the phone like they used to. That's totally fine. But even if it's a text or a direct message through social media or an email, I think we really need to respond to that missionary. And I think it's biblical to ignore somebody who is a fellow image bearer, who, in the first point, whose intent is to see life changed by Jesus. I think we really need to respond to them.
I'll put a little edge on that. Don't ghost missionaries in your life. Don't ghost them. I've had
don't go. Yeah, there you go.
I'm reaching out to somebody, and we probably have a pre-existing relationship, and I reach out, and they might even be like the senior pastor or in charge of the missions committee, and all of a sudden, they're not replying and they're not talking to anything. And that just, oh my goodness, does that cause confusion? And
it does.
It's hard to move forward. It's like, did I do something wrong? Did I say something wrong? When did I do that wrong? And why won't they even reply to my text? And so, that's a great one. Respond.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you have to say yes, no, or maybe, but please respond.
Please respond. There was a missionary friend of mine that told me recently that he was trying to reconnect with someone from his church that had previously given to their ministry. And after a year, he reached back out, tried to contact her for a month with no response. And occasionally, though, she would text my friend back and say, I'm in a meeting, or sorry, I can't talk right now. So that's good. That's helpful. But he continued to try to reach out because of those responses. One time he even ran into this person in the grocery store, and she said they could try to meet up after a family camping trip that she was going to go on. And so the missionary is believing the best in her, and he keeps reaching out for another 6 months, but with no further responses.
Ugh.
So to me, again, I'm not trying to shame anybody, but that's not helpful. The missionary cause is God's cause. It's urgent. And I think you can help make the missionary, help them make the most of their time.
Yeah, I mean, because their time really is an issue. Those 6 or 7 or 8 calls or texts, or they're typically, I've seen missionaries, they're trying to be graceful. They really don't want to be pushy, but every time they have to think and pray through, has it been too long? How come I haven't heard back? Did I say something wrong? You could actually save that missionary a lot of time and a lot of effort, and maybe even some emotional stress by simply responding whatever it is you're going to respond. But that's going to be a lot better than ghosting them, or just say, I'll talk to them next year if they call again, and not even telling them that.
Exactly. One further thought on this, Aaron, is one of the things we do in our training for our missionaries is we tell them that a non-response is not an answer, because it's not. All it tells us is it apparently wasn't a good time to connect with you.
Yeah.
And so I'm saying to the church, you can change that. One of the most common expectations of a missionary is to be completely ignored. You can change that.
Please change that.
You can change that. So this is I think they're hearing it in our voices, right?
Yeah.
This is a plea to the church to honor these image bearers, respond to them, and you will do, I think, the mission a great service.
And your time is valuable, and so is theirs. And also, by honoring their time, you actually end up wasting less of your time and less of theirs. So
exactly.
All right, I think we keep going on this. Let's go on to number 3.
Yes, number 3 is respectfully decline. So we know that. I mean, we're going to hear no more often than we hear yes, for sure. Not unlike evangelism. We hear no more often than we hear yes. And when we're raising support and inviting people to partner with us, we understand that not everybody's going to be able to do it. Not everybody's in a place to meet. There are a lot of good missions causes and churches to give to. We get that. But I don't know. I think, and again, I think I've talked about this maybe in another podcast, this concept in Minnesota. We call it Minnesota nice. But it's not that nice because the Minnesota nice thing would be, well, I don't want to upset that missionary by giving them a negative answer. But it would be more helpful to me if somebody told me, I thanks for contacting me. We're kind of maxed out with our missions giving right now, and get back to us in a year. Or even it would be more helpful to me to hear them say, I just don't think this is something that we're going to be able to help you with. That is more helpful to me to hear them say, I can't do it, thanks so much, than to not hear from them at all. So respectfully decline.
So true. Or, another one you can just respectfully decline, but maybe you need to respectfully ask a clarifying question.
Yeah.
Years ago, I learned that a church said no to me, really because they had made an assumption about I guess there had been some, political stuff, and there was, the church split a little bit, and another church had formed on the other side of town. And I wasn't there. I didn't live there. I wasn't a part of all that drama. What I know, though, is years later, I was speaking with the person who oversees our missions budget. And he said, well, yeah, we didn't really feel like we needed to continue partnering with you since that other church was partnering with you. And I said, wait, what? He said, yeah, they're partnering with you, right? Wow. And I said, no. He's like, wait, well, that was one of the reasons we decided not to partner with you anymore, is because we thought they were. And I was like, you never asked me that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you need to say no, that's fine. But also maybe try and clear up some thoughts you might have, and make sure there's no hanging questions in the air. Jump to your.
I'm sorry, I keep interrupting. Sorry about that. I just think clear communication both ways, right? We need to be clear as missionaries to communicate with our partners or prospective partners, and we would love to experience that from people that we're interacting with as well.
Yeah, clarifying questions, man. That would probably really help. And honestly, those often don't take that much time
Yeah.
to ask those questions.
Yeah.
But okay, so there's 3. Let's move on to the 4th one.
Yeah. 4 would be, well, the word we use is refer. Refer us to gospel-centered friends and family. Referral can sound a little corporate, but really we want to meet others who love Jesus and who have a heart to see the gospel go out to the world. So this can be really helpful. And again, I think what can happen is that we can get lumped into, and again, nothing wrong with these professions, but like a financial planner needs referrals, right? A realtor needs referrals. We get that, but we're simply saying we think we're a little bit different because we don't have a product to sell.
Right.
We've got a message to share.
Yes.
And so one of the greatest challenges, especially for people who maybe came to Christ through one of our ministries, and they didn't grow up in a church, they don't know a lot of Christians. And so one of the most helpful things that can happen is for you as a church member who loves the Lord and wants to see the mission go out there, is to put us in touch with people that you know that are like you.
Yeah, such a big one.
How it's huge. So, there's no product we're looking to sell, but the return on investment's really incalculable. How beautiful are the feet of those who preach the good news.
Yeah.
So do you believe, church member, that the man or the woman who has texted, called, emailed, messaged you has beautiful good news bearing feet?
Yeah.
And if so, consider putting them in touch with others.
I'm going to brag on somebody that did that very thing. And I don't know him personally, but I know the recipient. And I have a good friend who raised and lives on full-time support. He works for Fellowship of Christian Athletes and just does an amazing work. And he's even been a guest on this podcast before. His name is Micah May. And years ago, Micah had approached a church and a pastor and was trying to, set up a relationship, further set up a relationship and potentially get some support. And I don't remember all the reasons, but it wasn't going to happen. And yet that pastor understood Micah's heart for the gospel and for athletes and for teenagers. And what he did is and I'm not saying everybody has to do this, but he opened up his contact book and he hooked Micah up with multiple connections of saying, hey, call this lady, hey, or call this guy, hey, call this family. Tell them I said that you're legit and that they might want to hear about what you're having to talk about. And I don't know all the details beyond that, but Micah has told me that to this day he has multiple people that continue to pray for and partner with the wonderful Great Commission work they're doing. Yeah. And those people started because that particular ministry leader saw beyond their inability to give personally.
Absolutely. I mean, and even if you're not in a position to give financially, just can you commit to be receptive to their request to meet others? Because the Lord may do a work there. That happened with us, Erica and I, and this isn't maybe not uncommon for support raising missionaries. We in our minds we quit like 5 times. It took us a while. It's because it's hard. You hear a lot. You hear a lot of no's. You kind of wonder, is this really what God's calling me to? Yeah. It's harder than I expected. So we quit many times, and one of those occasions, we were just like, we don't know who else to contact, and we met with this couple, and they did not join us financially, but they committed to pray. And then they introduced us to about 5 or 6 other couples.
Praise the Lord.
And those 5 or 6 multiplied because they continued to do the same. Some of them joined us, and then some of them introduced us to others. But it just helped sustain us in the process of putting our team of partners together.
Yeah. Fantastic. All right. So I know everybody's waiting with bated breath. We've given them 4 out of 5. Hopefully everyone's still listening because we're trying to help Great Commission workers connect with Christians that aren't called to go to the field. Maybe you are called to go to the field and you get to partner with others as well. But anyway, we're trying to make that connection. We're trying to help people to have good considerations when a missionary contacts you about partnership, about money. So what is the 5th and final one that you want to bring up today?
Well, the fifth would be relinquish those funds with joy. Say yes, right? We've talked about respectfully declining, making sure we respond. But church, we're one body. with many members. We all have, as Romans says, we have gifts that differ according to the grace given to us. My wife has the spiritual gift of giving. I do not. But that impacts our family. Not everybody who is called to be a contributor, a financial partner, it has to have the spiritual gift of giving. Don't mistake the lack of that spiritual gift as a word from the Lord to store up treasures on earth.
Mm-hmm.
We want to consider the call on God on us all to give cheerfully.
Yes.
So that's the last thing is, again, we don't expect, nor are we saying here, everybody we invite to partner with us should say yes. But we are boldly, and really, honestly, a little bit less boldly than Paul, right? Like Paul's like, hey, Corinthians, I'm sending somebody to collect. They're coming, so be ready. He just assumed it.
Right.
That's so we're a little less bold than Paul.
Perhaps so.
But the invitation is to consider saying yes.
I'm going to jump in on there too. I'd say also say no. Like, it's okay to say no. Now, we don't want you to say no, and yet we realize sometimes you have to say no. But here's my point, Jason. Don't have it be a forever maybe. Like, be clear enough that you can tell somebody, hey, I need to say no for now. It's okay if you follow up with me, 6 months from now or 2 years from now or whatever else. But give somebody a yes, give somebody a no. You actually don't help that ministry worker when you're playing hard to get. And when you're not bold enough in your answer, you can actually cause confusion. You can kind of waste their time. I realize that's probably not anybody's intent.
Right.
And you can really cause them to wonder what's going on in your head and your heart, because they're trying to figure this out. They're not wanting to pressure you, and yet they have hard work to do in developing their support team. You actually help them when you've actually thought about it and prayed about it. You actually listen to their vision. And if you get to that point where you need to say no, not a quick no because you didn't listen, but you've actually listened and you prayed and thought about it and you're a no, tell them that. That actually helps them so much more than just leaving them hanging. Like what did they call that years ago with the Florida recount, the hanging Chad? We don't want hanging Chad. Not in support.
No, thanks. Yeah. So exactly. I think that, so we are hopefully our friends who are listening that are experiencing missionaries coming to them, hear our heart here, right? It's all about getting the good news of Jesus Christ as far and wide as we can. And so we hope these thoughts and these things to consider will help the church at large to understand maybe a little bit better what it's like to be on the missionary side, but also to really consider, okay, how can I be most helpful when approached by a missionary?
Yeah, that's great. So I'm sure there's other things we could think of, and even just sitting here like spitballing, I'm thinking like, sign up for their monthly team, or tell them, tell them when you're going to give and try and increase it every year. There's a lot of different things we could probably tell people to do. But I think these 5 basics, if we just got these 5 right, and I include you and me as well, Jason, because we get to partner with other people. In fact, hey, if you're the missionary and you're listening to this and you're not partnering with others, if you're not investing in visions for ministry other than just your own, you're robbing yourself. Don't do that to yourself. You get to be a part of the Great Commission in more than one way. But Jason, I think these 5 things to consider that you gave us today are just absolute gold. So thank you for bringing these to the podcast. I really appreciate it. And any final words of wisdom, though, for either the missionary who's asking or for the person who's being invited to be a part of their Great Commission work?
Well, it's good. I'm glad you mentioned the missionary. So again, I think I touched on this earlier, but for us as missionaries, and if you're a missionary listening to this, and when I say missionary, I mean both those who go internationally as well as those who serve in missions domestically here in the U.S. We do well to be thankful, right? We should be thankful for salvation in Jesus. for so much of what we've seen God do, and we are not called to be a bitter people. So I would love to just encourage missionaries to seek the Lord if there are roots of bitterness about experiences we've had with people in the church or from churches themselves. Right? We want to be always a people who are overflowing with gratitude, even for people willing to consider and respond to us in whatever response they're going to have.
So true. Good word. Good word. Well, Jason, thank you for joining me today on the SRS podcast. And we hope this is an episode that blesses many that get to consider partnering with missionaries.
Thanks, Aaron. Great to be with you.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. We would love to hear your ideas for future content. Please visit supportraisinSolutions.org/feedback to share your thoughts and questions. Also, wherever you download your podcast from, be sure to subscribe for future episodes and come back each week to gain more insight into the process of building and maintaining your personal support team.